Hello and welcome to Sydney Writers' Festival 2016. My name is Amelia Lester and I am delighted to welcome you all here to America, Writers Talk Politics. We'd like to thank the United States Studies Centre at the University of Sydney for their support of this session as well. And before I introduce our guests for today, I need to make a few short announcements. First of all, please switch all your mobile phones to silent. Do it now. Secondly, we ask that you don't record the event, keep photos to a minimum, and use the hashtag Sydney Writers Festival if tweeting. There will be time at the end of the session, I hope, for questions from the audience. And the writers will be available to sign books after the session in the Cracknell room. So, let me introduce our panel for today. Roger Cohen has worked at the New York Times for 25 years as a foreign correspondent. He's second from the end over there. He's worked as a foreign correspondent, foreign editor, and now a columnist. Prior to that, he worked for the Wall Street Journal and Reuters. He is the author of 4 books. The latest, a family memoir entitled The Girl from Human Street, Ghosts of Memory in a Jewish Family, was published to wide acclaim by Knopf in January 2015. He has taught at Harvard and Princeton, and his work has been recognized with several awards, including a Lifetime Achievement Award from Britain's Next Century Foundation and a prize from the Overseas Press Club of New York. Raised in South Africa and England, a graduate of Oxford, he is a naturalized American. Vivian Gornick, the other woman on this panel with me, is an American critic, journalist, essayist, and memoirist. She was a reporter for The Village Voice from 1969 to 1977. Her work has also appeared in the New York Times, The Nation, The Atlantic Monthly, and many other publications. She has published 11 books, including a biography of Emma Goldman, the critically acclaimed memoir Fierce Attachments, and the essay collections The Men in My Life and The End of the Novel of Life, which were finalists for the National Book Critics Circle Award. Her most recent book is the memoir The Odd Woman and the City. In 2007, she was a fellow at the Radcliffe Institute at Harvard University, and in 2014, she was the Bedell Distinguished Visiting Professor in Nonfiction at the University of Iowa. Aleksandar Hemon, who is on the end over here, is the author of The Lazarus Project, which was a finalist for the 2008 National Book Award and National Book Critics Circle Award, and 3 collections of short stories. The Question of Bruno, Nowhere Man, which was also a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award, and Love and Obstacles. His most recent novel is The Making of Zombie Wars. Born in Sarajevo, he visited Chicago in 1992, intending to stay for a matter of months. While he was there, Sarajevo came under siege and he was unable to return home. He wrote his first story in English in 1995, was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship in 2003, and a Genius Grant from the MacArthur Foundation in 2004. He lives in Chicago with his wife and daughter. And David Smith, who is next to me on the stage, is a senior lecturer in American politics and foreign policy and the United States Studies Center academic director at the University of Sydney. He has a PhD in political science from the University of Michigan and a BA from the University of Sydney. His research examines political relations between states and minorities with a focus on religion in the US. His book, Religious Persecution and Political Order in the United States, was published by Cambridge University Press in 2015. And finally, I do not have a Genius Award and I have not written a book, but I did spend 15 years in the US. I'm originally Australian and I returned here about 4 months ago. I was working at the New Yorker magazine, and before that was at Harvard University, and here I am an editor I'm the editor of Good Weekend magazine. So that was quite a lengthy series of introductions, so let's get right into the conversation. And I wanted to start with you, Roger, because you were the only person backstage who agreed to try a Tim Tam. And they were white chocolate,
Pretty good, a little sweet. Okay.
That was sweet, yeah.
Roger, you've written that America's election is the world's election, but only America gets to vote in it. I'm curious, as a naturalized American, as someone who came to America, at what moment did you start seeing yourself as American? Was there a single moment? And how does the fact that you were not born in the United States affect how you view this election?
Well, I started feeling like an American pretty soon after arriving in New York. I'd always felt, being Jewish in Britain, that it was not an identity that one could express exuberantly. Philip Roth speaks of Jews in a whisper in Britain, and Louis Namier speaks of the trembling Israelites of Britain. And I always felt a little bit of an outsider there. And when I got to New York, it was obviously very different. And the vastness of America, the fact that it's not where you come from, it's what can you do for me? What can you do for me tomorrow? I think the greatest single strength of the United States, despite all its current difficulties, is just that, that people are forward-focused. And yeah, there is this global fascination to get to our subject, of course, with, and I have to pronounce those two words, Donald Trump. And I think in that sense, even when I got here, I've never been to Australia before, and people have seemed to me more interested almost in talking about Donald Trump than about Prime Minister Turnbull and the Labour Party leader. So, and it's a very obviously troubling moment in the United States where you have this rabble-rousing TV huckster, caudillo-type character who, it's not what he says, because what he says can be endlessly adjusted. For me, it's who he is. In my view, he's an egomaniac. He's a bully. He believes he can bend everybody to his will. And the combination of that personality and that much power is troubling, and to say the least. So I do think it's a very disturbing moment in American politics, and it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that this man will be in the White House.
Sasha, you also came to America from elsewhere. How has that affected how you view this election and its debate about what it means to be American?
Well, I became an American citizen in 2000, exactly between the election and the Supreme Court decision. So my first sentiment as an American was an embarrassment with the political system and the outcome of the election. And so I have lived with various forms of such embarrassment ever since. But then also, as a Bosnian, there are so many reasons to be embarrassed. I dream of living in a country whose government I respect, for 2 weeks or so. So then I need not tell you that, Australia didn't quite do it for me this time around. But the United States has, of course, a kind of a mythological, symbolic value in the world of world politics. It's a democracy that always wants to exceed itself, and then therefore necessarily runs into some form of disappointment. But Donald Trump is, I think, I agree with Roger, obviously, that he being in the White House is a nightmare in so many ways. But to me, in addition to that, the worst has already happened in some ways. He activated and formulated by his very hairdo the worst possibilities, the worst potentials in America, from activating white supremacists who are now on the rise and formulating, and they're trolling people with the insults that would have been unimaginable not so long ago. Now it's been normalized. One of the things that Trump has done for them and for us, unfortunately, is that the kind of language and behavior and fantasies and possibilities of violence have been normalized to the extent that we are already negotiating individually and collectively what would be acceptable, right? What level of insanity would be acceptable? And we already, in some ways, this is acceptable. We would settle for this, but it's already bad. There's a fascist subset of the population that is active, excited. They're formulating their not only their thinking, if they practice such a thing, but their way they act in the political and public space. And it's being normalized. I have had some experience, as you might imagine, with a breakdown of social order and the push toward fascism with my Bosnian experience and the demise of Yugoslavia and the war in Bosnia. And the thing that scares me most is precisely this negotiation. It's symptomatic. We are trying to imagine what it would look like while still remaining within the realm of the reasonable. But the scariest thing is that what Trump represents, what he could do, could exceed that realm. In other words, they might be unimaginable things. We're still pushing him and trying to fit him into the framework of the reasonable, of behaving according to some manners and customs and laws and rules of American political and system and public behavior. But he is constantly pushing those boundaries, and people who support him are responding to that. And I fear that the time might come, and there might be some kind of external trigger where he would just abandon, or the whole group that support him would abandon any of the pretenses that they will comply with those customs that we are so used to.
Yeah, Vivian, on that point, I think of you as a kind of quintessential New Yorker, and your latest book feels very rooted in the city. Trump is also a New Yorker, though not, I would argue, the quintessential New Yorker. Tell me how do you view him as a New Yorker? Is he...
Him as a New Yorker? Well, there are all kinds of people who are quintessential New Yorkers. He is all the things that these two gentlemen are saying he is. He's a bully, he's a gutter snipe, he's certainly a child of the streets, he's a carnival, he's a circus, he's our Berlusconi. How we got here is the important thing more than him. However, I do not think America is ever going to go fascist. So let me back up a little bit here. I am Jewish and daughter of the Jewish immigrant working class. And in a large sense, I never felt I was American in the sense that I'm speaking of. I would feel American abroad, but at home, I'd feel I was a New Yorker, not an American as such. However, I am a self-described second-wave feminist, a daughter of the 60s. The 60s to the 80s were a very powerful set of years for me and people like me. And the liberationist movements were transforming. Women's rights, gay rights, blacks, all of that was my politics. And it made me feel American as I had never felt before. However, at the same time, what we found was we had opened a Pandora's box of troubles, right? Huge portions of the country fell back in horror and fear and anxiety at levels that I had never experienced throughout my life until then. And none of us could believe that this was, none of us, when I say none of us, I mean me and people like me. We couldn't believe that this was happening, right? That we couldn't believe that the United States would go to such extremes in its fears of all the things that we had raised, all the ways in which we had raised the anxieties in the hope that they would dissipate themselves with more knowledge, more understanding, more acting. As women became, we hoped, full citizens, and homosexuals were decriminalized, and blacks would take their place. We thought all this was going to end in a more complete democracy. None of us were revolutionaries. None of these movements were revolutionary. They were dissident in a good way, but essentially they were there to make a more perfect democracy. So out in the Midwest and in the South and in all these other places in the country, people responded with horror. The buzzwords became abortion and gay marriage, right? And the time when I understood what was really happening here was when an American journalist named Tom Frank wrote a book called Whatever Happened to Kansas. And what he was saying there was he couldn't understand how populist America had gone Republican. Didn't these people understand that the Republican Party did not serve their interests? And we immediately understood that he was not understanding that their interests were not economic. Right? Their interests were all these terrorists. From there to Donald Trump was a pretty clear shot. The country, and then in 2008, the final betrayal. I mean, when no Wall Street criminal was sent to jail, 6 million people have had their houses foreclosed on them. 6 million. You know what that means? It's an astonishing thing that so many people who didn't read the fine print, who didn't understand, they were living in houses they'd lived in all their lives and that they were going to inherit and have for their children, and suddenly they're out in the cold. All these things together have made a profoundly disaffected nation. Really.
Plus a black man elected to the White House.
Well, yeah, that too, right. Yes, racism in America, was increased. Everything that was hoped for turned on itself. And yes, racism, every single ill that you could imagine has imploded. And so what he is the biggest huckster in the world. You know, he's the guy who's saying, I'm just like the rest of you, only more so, right? He's the Huey Long of the current moment. And all they want to say to the world is, fuck you. And he's saying it for them. And we're in a terrible state. However, I do not believe America will ever go fascist. I do not believe we're going to have a strong man, even if he's in the White House, that we will become a lawless nation, that the Congress will stop operating, that he will become the strong man of the world. I think that's nonsense.
How come?
Because I think it's a very strong country. It's just as Roger finds those things. You know, essentially, the country is solid middle. You know, it has never actually gone to the extremes that threaten all the time. Even since George Bush, the second George Bush, when supposedly everybody in the White House was falling to their knees and praying in the morning, nothing really happened. You know, we have not become a crazed fundamentalist country.
But as Sasha said, there could be a spark if you take that character and a mob movement, and then you get a Paris-style, touch wood, it won't happen, but you get a Paris-style attack in some American city or some equivalent.
Yeah, you
Tempers
could.
are up. I mean, people.
They are.
You know, you're getting now reporters at the Washington Post and the New York Times with Jewish names, and this wave of tweets, anti-Semitic tweets from. He's insulted everybody. He's insulted women.
Yeah.
He's insulted Hispanics.
Absolutely.
He's insulted women, and it all just washes off him.
David,
Washes off him,
Sorry,
but it washes off us too.
Yeah.
let's bring David into it, because he did something this morning that none of the rest of us did.
Right.
Something unspeakable. He actually read a Donald Trump book from cover to cover.
He suffered for us.
Tell us what
These
you
are the
learned.
sacrifices I make. I spend all day following the US election, and at night I get home and turn on coverage of the Australian election. And it's like drinking a warm cup of tea at the end of a day of very heavy drinking. I tend to agree with Vivian. I think that Trump, he does have fascist supporters, and this open anti-Semitism that we're seeing is really worrying, albeit it's the kind of fascists who are largely confined to the basement of their parents' houses rather than out in the streets. Trump himself, though, is not a fascist because fascists believe in something bigger than themselves.
Right.
And
Good point. Very good point.
Trump, there's no ism there. I mean, Trump has a radically anti-political view. The way that Trump sees it, America's domestic prosperity is dependent on it being on top and assertive and dominant in the world. And he says that America is not dominant in the world anymore because leaders have been weak and incompetent and stupid. He's not a typical demagogue in that respect. A typical demagogue will have a narrative of elite betrayal. Will say, your leaders sold you out to enrich themselves. Trump says, he doesn't say anything like this. He says, no, they just don't know how to negotiate. They're pathetic. His tune, for example, on Barack Obama has really changed. 5 years ago, he was basically saying he's not a real American. Now he's saying he just doesn't play golf with the right people. He doesn't know the kind of people I know, and that's why he can't make a good deal.
Exactly.
So, it's not a comforting book, and one of the very worrying things about it is he seems to view international relations as a game of poker, essentially.
Right.
And he says, people have criticised me for being unpredictable. Unpredictability is what makes me a great businessman. You know, I don't give my hand away. I play my cards close to my chest. I don't broadcast my strategy. Okay, all of these things are assets in business, and they're certainly assets in a game of poker. But when you're talking about a guy who wants to be at the head of a country of 300 million people with a nuclear arsenal, that kind of unpredictability I find it deeply, deeply disturbing. And I can see what Trump's appeal is, but I think that to believe in Trump, you have to have the same level of faith in his abilities as he has. And
Exactly.
yeah, and in that respect, he's a classic charismatic leader. Charismatic leaders are always polarizing. You either see it or you don't. And at the moment, the majority of Americans don't see it, and I just hope that by the time November rolls around, they still don't see it.
Roger, you've written millions of people who vote for Trump cannot be wrong while denouncing his we won't be suckers anymore ideology, as you put it. But what did you mean by that? I mean, what do you see as the reason why millions of Americans have latched onto?
Well, I think there's an anger in the United States. It's very diffuse. Some of it's to do with perception of growing inequality, perception of stagnant incomes. And there's a feeling in the middle America that Vivian was just describing, the flyover country, that I guess, I mean, aside from birth certificates, just this feeling that Barack Obama, highly intelligent, prudent, reasonable, extremely articulate, good with words, he's seen, and in many ways he is, he's a kind of a European social democrat, and a very good European social democrat. But I think to a lot of Americans, they see him as somebody not of their culture, not of their world, plus the race element. And I'm an admirer of President Obama, but I think if there's one element of politics that he hasn't really used, it's the theater of politics. I mean, politics is also theater. I mean, I was in Paris right after the attacks last November, and the first speech that the president made, he was in Turkey, was completely flat, did not grasp the enormity of what happened. And I think for that America, Trump is the perfect anti-Obama. I mean, it's all theater, it's all demagoguery, it's all America, it's this sort of loud America. This America that believes in itself, this America that's going to reassert itself. But I do think, the fact that he's a buffoon, as we were just hearing, I don't think that's kind of reassuring in a way. I mean, Mussolini was a buffoon. I mean, there's nothing that precludes a buffoon being extremely dangerous. I think we have to be, but he has the momentum, and we haven't spoken about Hillary Clinton yet. She's problematic as a candidate. There's a feeling about her that she's untrustworthy, and that she's used goods, yesterday's story. And the fact that a 74-year-old Jewish socialist from Brooklyn has been able to run her extremely close and is still hanging in there tells you something about the resistance to her candidacy in the country. And Trump has already demonstrated that he's very adept one-on-one. I mean, low-energy Bush, little Mario, lying Ted. There'll be an epithet for Hillary. He's
already got it. It's Crooked Hillary.
Crooked Hillary, right. Thank you, David. Yeah, so, it's going to be, there's a school that believes Hillary Clinton is a shoo-in at this point. I wish I believed that. I don't. I think she's the favorite. I think she's the favorite. But. No, and American institutions are powerful. I mean, it's not Italy. On the other hand, Berlusconi did not have nukes, so there's a trade-off there.
Oh, you don't really believe that.
Sasha?
It seems to me that I don't think that fascism will take hold in the United States, but what Trump has done already is fracture the public space as some kind of, not monolithic, but at least solid body politic. And he's not the one who's started doing that. I think there's a clear continuity between, even if complicated, between Bush and the GOP that Bush generated, and the war on terror and all that, and Trump. It's that the GOP lost control of Trump. He was their Frankenstein. I mean, Ted Cruz is a sociopath as opposed to a narcissist. But you know, somehow he became fine distinctions in American politics.
Such an enticing choice.
Yes,
Yeah,
and so, but somehow in their imagination he could, you know, fit the profile of an acceptable candidate. And I cannot imagine how less troubling it would be if Ted Cruz was, you know, the GOP candidate. So there has been, and I've been thinking about this all these years. I've hated the Bush regime and everyone related to them. But the fracturing has started a while ago, I think, and this is coming to a head, and Trump is riding this. See, I think it's hard for me to believe that he was expecting to be a GOP beyond his usual, you know, belief in his own abilities, that he will be the Republican nominee. But this fracturing will not lead to his complete control of the political system of the country. There will be struggle and conflict. You know, I'm not going to sit back and say, good luck to you. Everyone voted, and I respect the choice. I'm not going to respect that choice. I don't care if it's, you know, how many people voted for Trump. We're going to have to fight against this daily. And we can probably start imagining how a democratic city like Chicago will simply not yield to Trump, will just refuse to obey whatever he,
Well, they already put in
issues.
a pretty strong showing against Trump when he was
we
there.
ran him out of town, yes.
Yeah.
I feel at this point, I absolutely have to say, I do not think Donald Trump will ever become the president of the United States. I really don't. First of all, the numbers that are involved in his affirmation, you know, the numbers of people who are responsible for his winning these primaries, you know, they're a fraction of the states that they come from. And also, nobody in the states can ever become president without the women, the blacks, the Latinos. And he's not going to get them. Never.
A lot of women
Remember,
are
you
voting
heard
for
that
him.
here. Hillary Clinton, for better or for worse, I believe will be our next president.
Vivian, I find that
Thank you,
very,
Vivian.
very soothing.
Her untrustworthiness is so overplayed. It's so ridiculous.
But yesterday in the Times, there was a poll that showed that disapproval ratings for both Hillary and Trump are actually around the same in the general electorate, hovering around 60%.
Yeah, I know. But that's 60% of what percentage of people who are polled?
I mean, all I'm saying is
These polls are the bane of our existence. They really are. They send people crazy from one 24-hour period to the next. The polls go up and down every second. There's
been quite a lot made out of the fact that both Trump and Clinton have actually record low levels of favourability. I think that has to be put in the context of the record low levels of unpopularity of every branch of government in the United States. I can't remember the last time when more than 20% of people said that they thought Congress was doing a good job. This is part of Trump's whole appeal, and I completely agree with Sasha on the sort of continuity. One of the continuities is that Republicans have been saying for many years, government is completely useless, politics are completely useless. Really, this country should be run by businessmen, right? Devolve everything possible to the market. Then they were shocked when actually along comes a businessman who takes this seriously. And so, yeah, this, once again, this kind of complete anti-politics. And I think that some Republicans have since sort of tried to say, look, he's really just not one of ours, and he never was one of ours. And it's true that Trump is not a conservative ideologue. I mean, I don't think he's read the collected works of Edmund Burke. But the emotions that he's tapping into are things that have been building on the conservative side, especially for a very long time. And one of them is the idea that political correctness is destroying America, right? Political correctness, it's not just a punchline, it's not just something that's mildly annoying, it's not just, that white college kids can't say the N-word when they're singing along to rap songs. In Trump's view, it's actually an existential threat to America. And what he's doing there is he's picking up basically on the grievance of a racial majority that sees itself increasingly in terms of victimhood. I mean, Trump sees America in terms of victimhood, which is another major trope since 9/11. He says America's allies are ripping America off.
Right.
He's not wrong in terms of Saudi Arabia, but he's saying that, I mean, he hasn't mentioned Australia yet, fortunately, but South Korea.
There are a lot of Australians making coffee in New York.
That's right, yeah. Japan, Germany, Britain, they're all ripping America off. And
they love hearing that. They love hearing ripped off, no matter who's ripping who's off. When he says the system is rigged, and everyone cheers like crazy, it's painful. It's really painful. It's painful because you realize how right, how true the system is rigged. He's one of the people rigging it, and how painful it is to see the disaffection of the country and what ignorance it has led them into.
Just on the political correctness point, though, since
the political correctness.
That's obviously an interesting thread, since on the left there's also now an emerging debate about whether political correctness is stifling speech.
Right, yeah.
Vivian, do you see political correctness as an issue for the left as well?
Political correctness has grown out of all of our, all of the liberationist movements, all of the tremendous social turmoil and upheaval that has overtaken the country, and which people like me were grateful for. We were happy to see all this happen. The fact that it has, hardened, that it hardens often into, which is an old story. No social revolution ever took place that these abuses didn't take place. The fact that it hardens into so many aspects of what feels like abuse is inevitable. I mean, in other words, one man's liberation is another one's subjection. It's right.
Yeah, but when at Yale you get, Halloween costumes being deemed unacceptable because they might conceivably give offense to somebody or other. I mean, there is a point at which all this becomes stifling.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
that is an issue. And also, I don't think you can start judging historical figures by the standards of our times. When, a movement to strip Woodrow Wilson's name from every single building at Princeton and rename institutions. I mean, he was a racist. He was also a Southern gentleman of his time a century ago. And I think that kind of discussion really leads nowhere. So there is an issue, but it's not.
But I also think the political correctness is a code for, unleashing misogyny and racism, right? But somehow that to talk about that is acceptable again. I'm sure that I know there are issues in academia and so on,
no, you're right.
but it's a code for just white solidarity.
Yeah, and the demographics, I mean, underneath this, there is the fact that 20 or 30 years from now, the white population of the United States will no longer be the majority. I mean, the country is changing.
Yes.
And the white population has run the United States for a very long time. So there's that anxiety, there's that anger, and along comes Donald Trump, and yes, he's...
I think that's a very important point, but in a few electoral cycles, it'll be statistically impossible, practically, for the GOP base to win the elections. In some ways, this is one of their last chances. So all bets are off, I think, and the base has sensed it, and the GOP, elites have not. They might figure it out. So even if Trump doesn't win this time, it's hard for me to imagine that the next electoral cycle there will be a more moderate GOP candidate. They have to crank up the conflict, because any kind of negotiation in the middle, it's no longer an acceptable proposition. Trump, for one thing, has ruined this.
I think, and I think another big trend is just the power shift in the world. The United States is coming out of 2 unwon wars. I mean, I wrote a column back in, I think, October last year called Weimar America, in which I said, Trump has to be taken very, very seriously, because there is this feeling of America's power slipping away, and the tectonic plates of global power are shifting, and those are the moments that are most dangerous in history.
Absolutely.
And,
No
and
question.
you know, this man is appearing against that backdrop. And yeah, David said he's not wrong that and indeed President Obama's been saying it. We can't. Allies have to pay more. America can't go on forever underwriting global security the way it does. On the other hand, careful what you wish for, because Pax Americana means that I, unlike all my forebears, having been born in Europe, was not involved in the repetitive carnage that affected the continent and also saw Australia fighting in Europe, over the previous 75 years or century, or indeed centuries. So.
Yeah.
Sadly, my attempt to pivot us towards Hillary by talking about the left did not work, which I think is telling, because Trump just sucks up all the air in the room. But I do want to get to the Democratic Party, because they still have a good shot of winning this election. And Vivian, this is a preposterously large topic, but we have to address it. And it's the issue of feminism and Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
And Gloria Steinem a few weeks ago famously remarked that young women were becoming Bernie supporters
That was a
because
drag.
their boyfriends liked Bernie.
And she apologized.
But why? And she apologized. But as a way into this question, why is it, do you think, that Hillary, even amongst young women who should be presumably celebrating the fact that a woman might become the first president,
are not.
Are not.
Because she's not an inspiring figure. The women of my generation are, like Steinem and, the women of my generation are still immensely attached to the idea of a woman becoming president of the United States, so much so that they are solidly behind Hillary. I say they because I don't share it. I mean, I'm not a supporter, I'm not a detractor. I will support her because she's the only thing we've got going. The she is. I mean, the young women, perhaps it's a measure of our success that they are not so taken with the obsession with having a woman in the White House. And she's not an inspirational figure. And young people, it's a measure of those who are so passionate about Trump that young people are so passionate about Bernie Sanders and not about her, because she's not inspirational. But I believe she's a perfectly decent politician. She has a huge experience of how the world works, and that is very impressive, actually, whatever she will do. And I believe that fundamentally, she and her husband are a power couple. They're just involved in being powerful in politics. They have no politics. They're politicians. And she is like that, but they lean to the left. They lean towards liberalism. And I don't believe that she will do anything dangerous. I don't know if she will get us out of any, she will be a great president. No. But I think that's why the young women, and as I say, I think perhaps it's a measure of our success, that they feel free enough to not, right? You agree, right? I agree. Go. Go.
Vivian, I'm moderating this. We need to keep Sasha, I wanted to ask what you think. Hillary's originally from Illinois.
Park Ridge, yes.
Do you wish that Bernie would just get out of the race already?
Well, I'm getting scared now, so I'm beginning to fear that he might wait too late. I have to point out, however, that Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton are the minds behind the movement of the Democratic Party toward right. I arrived in the United States in '92, yes. I mean, since '92, they've been systematically in various ways eliminating the left from the Democratic Party with purges and reshufflings and so on. So and I remember Bernie Sanders when he was the only socialist representative in the House of Representatives. I believe the policy, you might remember this, was called triangulation, had a fancy name, where the Democratic, and Tony Blair followed this.
Third way also.
The third way, right, so that they would eliminate the hard left because they calculated that women, homosexuals, unions, and all that traditional left support would vote for them anyway. So they would give rhetorical concessions, but did not have to worry about them voting for Republicans.
Right.
And so this is partly Tom Frank's argument. And they've been doing this steadily. So that in my time in the United States, which was about 25 years, the Democratic Party has moved to the right. The left option has been neglected, to put it mildly. Bernie Sanders is part of that old left. He is a 74-year-old Jewish socialist from Brooklyn, but he still remembers the time when the Democratic Party had a left. And so it's this strange coalition
he
He
between
was
the young
never even a
people.
part of. I mean, he's not a Democrat. He was always well to the left.
Right. He was a socialist,
yes.
and then he turned Democrat.
Yeah.
He was the only socialist representative.
Yeah.
And so she's kind of, I see it, she's paying the price for that policy. And she built that coalition against her. I keep hoping that at some point Bernites would form a coalition with Hillary, and Hillary, being a reasonable politician, she would make concessions. I keep thinking this was the plan, Bernie's plan all along, that to put pressure from the left so
Well,
as
I
to
think
force
In the
certain
beginning, we
concessions.
he's obliged her. I think that's a very important
Yeah.
thing that he's done. He's obliged her
Yeah.
to confront the impunity you mentioned at the beginning, Amelia, from 2008. And I think just this broad fact that we've seen globalization now for a quarter century since the fall of the Berlin Wall. And it's an inexorable process, at least in Western societies. I mean, it's brought here in Asia hundreds of millions out of poverty, but in Western societies, it's led to stagnating incomes, a feeling of lost jobs, and a feeling that we live with forces that are outside of our control, and the whole system is rigged. And that's what's behind this extraordinary kind of rediscovery by young people of a form of socialism that seemed like it had been discredited a century ago. I mean, you've got Jeremy Corbyn leading the Labour Party in Britain, and now this amazing Bernie Sanders phenomenon in the US. And I think if it does, because Hillary will have to make deals, I think.
Yeah.
He's going to be a figure in the election, even after he presumably withdraws at some point.
But do you see it as Sasha suggested, Hillary paying the price for that rightward lurch, or is it just that, as maybe Vivian was also suggesting, she's not that compelling or likable or charismatic a figure? Is it just that people don't like her, or is it that they're punishing her?
Well, the fact that Bernie's done so
Yes.
well? Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, she is not. There's resistance to her. She had everything in her hands to win the nomination in 2008, and she lost to Barack Obama. And this time, nobody expected her to be challenged, right, to this degree
Right, to this degree.
Are
by
you
Sanders.
surprised?
So there's an issue with Hillary. I mean, I don't. Yeah, I think the whole Clinton Global Initiative, the way they walk so close to the line in terms of where does money go exactly, these
ethical.
speeches, there's a money issue with the Clintons, and people feel uneasy about it.
But how many people?
Well,
and
that
even if
remains to
they
be
feel
seen.
uneasy,
Yeah.
David,
they feel uneasy.
I
But
think
what else have they got?
the return of the socialist label in the United States is just remarkable.
Right.
And I think it's partly because there are more and more people who don't remember the Cold War. Also, the Republicans used socialist as a synonym for black for 8 years in reference to Barack Obama, which kind of robbed the term of a bit of its meaning. So this kind of comeback is remarkable. I think it's important to remember, and I think, Vivian, when you say how many people, this is a really good point. We have to remember that the number of people who actually vote in primaries in the United States is a tiny minority made up of political activists. And Sanders is their candidate. Sanders, even though he's not a Democrat, he embodies the pure Democrat position that a lot of activists feel has been taken away from them by the Clintons, to a large degree by Obama as well, who, he has not governed as a left-winger. The Affordable Care Act, it's important to remember, was devised by the Heritage Foundation in 1989 and first implemented by a Republican governor called Mitt Romney in 2006. In Australian terms, Barack Obama would be in the Liberal Party, and he would not be in the left wing of the Liberal Party.
Definitely not.
Do you really think that?
Yeah,
Oh, I do too.
I really
Absolutely, he's
think
not a
that he would
lefty.
be somewhere to the right of Malcolm Turnbull.
Yeah.
It's hard to say how
Yeah.
right, because Malcolm keeps changing.
I don't get this.
I think another sort of villain in the Democratic Party that's worth mentioning is one of Obama's top political advisors, now mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, who, I mean, Chicago always gets governed by autocrats. That's just the kind of city it is. When you get into a taxi there, it says, "Welcome to Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, mayor," and it's like he's watching you at every step. But he's become known
Better pay your fare.
Yeah, for closing down dozens of schools in order to try to let charter schools flourish in Chicago. Just doing all this stuff that you would expect a Republican to do. And part of the Sanders wave is just Democrats who think if this is what we are going to get, then there is no point. And I don't think that any Sanders supporters are going to be voting for Trump. And Sanders has already signalled, even if he doesn't full-throatedly support Clinton, he is going to try to throw a major effort behind stopping Trump, although it could actually be something quite independent of the Democratic Party. We'll wait to see. I think perhaps nothing in retrospect is as surprising as it seemed at the time. And I think in retrospect, it actually isn't that surprising that someone who was pronouncedly of the left was able to run this close with Hillary Clinton.
Sorry, Vivian.
Just one thing. Bernie Sanders is not campaigning as a socialist. He is campaigning on inequality. He's campaigning on what the whole world is involved with he's campaigning on the 1% and the 99%. He's not campaigning as a socialist.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy.
He would be in the Labour right in Australia.
I'm loving these analogies.
That's what we want.
We've got four preposterously smart people talking about an enormous subject here. So keeping in mind that it's just impossible to cover everything, I think we're going to pivot to a few questions. Note the word question there, not statement, speech,
Right.
or hobby horse. So now we're going to, so there are microphones down below here on either side and also up there on either side, and I will be ruthless in cutting you off if needed. But while we wait for people to assemble, there's an excellent question here from the live stream audience, and I should have mentioned before that this is being streamed to a number of regional centres around Australia, and I welcome those viewers. And this is a question that I think Roger and I, as the two people affiliated with media organizations, are probably, this is probably more relevant to us, but it's an important question to ask. Are the media playing the largest role in determining the outcome of the election, being so selective on who they give airtime to? Now, obviously, Roger, this is a criticism that has been made against various media organizations about Trump. Do you think that there's any credence to it?
I think it is troubling that he's dominated coverage to this degree. The thing about Trump is he's a good yarn. You know, he's a good yarn. People like to read about him. You know, the hair, the whole craziness of a lot of what he says. You know, look, he's a media figure. I mean, he understands all this. His brand identification at the outset of this was huge. And if there's one movie, I think, to watch to understand the Trump phenomenon, it's Kazan's brilliant movie from the 1950s, A Face in the Crowd. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but it's this hillbilly, you know, who on the basis, you know, he can sing beautifully, he's got the gift of the gab on radio, and he's projected, and that was the beginning of television, and he's projected through TV to this position ultimately of huge power. And it's a very cautionary tale. So, yeah, I think it is problematic. It's also problematic that media these days has become so tribal. You know, there are different tribes hurling abuse at each other. And, you know, Berlusconi came from Italy, where there's not, like in Britain or Germany, an equivalent, and I guess, is there in Australia? I don't know, but the equivalent of the BBC or some place where there can still be discourse. No, it's this tribal cacophony, and I think, again, that also plays into Trump's hands.
I think, if I just may, I was looking at this question, and, you know, the question used the word media and then referred to television.
Yeah.
The press is unmentioned.
Right.
Right.
And, you know, someone somewhere is writing a study how how the American politics used to be covered by the press and now covered by television, where these visual qualities, so, the spectacle of Trump's hair and spray on tan are more valuable than the actual grammar in his sentence. I read the transcripts from his meeting with the editors of New York Times, and it's an English teacher's nightmare. I mean, he cannot organize it in any way. There's no syntax there. Bush was an idiot, but he was trying to formulate thought, and then he failed. But somewhere in there, but Trump is not even trying. It's just this logorrhea. It just keeps coming because on television, you don't have to produce a thought.
Yeah.
You just stay on television while talking.
Trump is the first post-verbal candidate.
Yes, exactly, yes.
In
That's
debates,
good.
it was after nearly every debate, the media declared someone else the winner because they made the mistake of focusing on things that people had said. Rather than looking at the visual spectacle, which was Trump standing in the middle of the stage, dominating everybody else with his body language, and every other candidate talking
How
about him
big are his
constantly.
hands? That's the other big
It
question.
did not matter what he said.
Right.
He understood the theatre of it like no one else did.
Question down here.
Yeah, I keep seeing, and even this morning I saw a reference to Ronald Reagan being a great president. Why?
That's a question.
Who can answer that one?
Can I make an observation here?
David.
Barack Obama's popularity is currently at 53%, which might not seem that high, but his average throughout his presidency has been between about 40 and 45%. It's actually higher than what Reagan's popularity was at the equivalent point. And I think there's actually a possibility that Obama is going to go down as the Democratic Reagan, because the way that history telescopes things, the way that people are remembered, it's not always to do with actually how they were perceived at the time. I think that Reagan is constantly invoked by Republican candidates as a forgetting device. It's a way of forgetting about George W. Bush. You listen to Republican debates, you would never know that there was a Republican president called George W. Bush.
Right.
Talking about Reagan all the time, basically on the same level as Lincoln, is a way of, it's an act of forgetting.
You're absolutely right. Dead on. Dead on.
Question down here.
He did also, the Cold War ended on his watch. He told Mr. Gorbachev to tear down the wall, and he confronted the Soviet, when the chance for negotiation with Gorbachev emerged, he took it. So I think that's not nothing.
No.
But that's not what the Republicans cherish about him.
Yeah.
That kind of negotiation.
But in
rather than
terms of the
toughness.
history of the world, it
Yeah.
is
No, I agree.
a significant achievement.
Yes.
My question is, has the hornet's nest already been stirred with Trump? And we've spoken about the danger of him being elected. What is the danger of America if he's not elected?
I don't understand what he
I think the
said.
Hornets.
I'm talking about the people that Ted Cruz was standing in front of a couple of weeks ago, who were shouting him down and all the loonies. What's their reaction going to be if he's not elected?
He said that if he's not elected, he's moving to Australia. That's
Good luck to you. Yes.
That's good. That's good.
I think the damage has been done to a large extent. That people, his supporters, they're not going to retreat to the comments section on the internet if he loses the elections. They're going to be angry, and they're going to be even more hateful. And I think one of the things we didn't bring up, and this would come up if Hillary is elected, is the importance of misogyny and, on the one hand, and the flip side of it is sort of masculinity that Trump projects. He's a Viagra president, and there's a psychosocial aspect. I don't think,
post-verbal Viagra president.
but I think that the loss of American prestige in the world has been seen by
Sounds
many.
like a great date.
Right. What more could a girl want?
A post-verbal man.
Can't talk.
I think the loss of American power has been seen by many as sort of emasculation of America. And so it also is a continuity with Bush, the sort of reasserting American male power inside the country and outside the country. And then Trump is this, Frankenstein effect of that. And if Hillary is the oppositional force to people who are projecting, their need to restore their masculine power, then I shudder to think the levels of misogyny and the levels of hatred towards Hillary, who will not only be a Democrat, not only corrupt, but a woman.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the word misogyny, because we should have gotten to it. You're right. Vivian, when we were talking about Hillary, do you not think part of the lack of appeal could be that people don't want to see a woman as president, either men or women? There's an aversion, even amongst Democrats, to that idea.
Well, yes, of course. I mean, misogyny is as alive and well as anything. Yes, of course. The hatred of her has turned, at least 60, 70% on her being a woman. If you took a look at what goes on the internet, the things that people say about her are so vicious and so criminal and so frightening. Yes, of course, misogyny is alive and well. Millions of people would never want to see a woman any more than a black or a homosexual or any of the elements, the minorities of the country, of the society. And sure, she is maligned as a woman, but here we are. I mean, here she is. I don't believe that misogyny will prevent her from becoming the president. I don't believe that.
Sorry, question from up top.
It's interesting, the speakers have spoken about a loss of American prestige, a feeling that it isn't what it once was. But here we are sitting, a long way away from there, and it still seems to me like the greatest nation on earth, the only nation that is able to project its power globally, the nation that is whose soft power ideas are still very attractive in a way that's a country that perhaps like China or is not. So I'm interested in why Americans feel that they're not what they were.
Can I have a shot? Yeah. I'll take a shot at that. And I'll preface this by saying that there's always a disconnection between how Americans see their own country and how the rest of the world sees it. So yes, from our point of view, the United States is clearly still on top militarily, economically, politically. We know how much importance something like the US election has for us because of this. But I mean, I lived in flyover country for 7 years in Michigan, and there was a strong feeling there that when manufacturing jobs leave towns and they don't come back, and some alternative industry doesn't come along, and a lot of people are left without anything. And these kinds of places have been voting for Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, that a lot of that is related to a loss of international prestige. And that the movement of jobs and businesses offshore, that is somehow related to America's international political standing as well. One of the remarkable things about Trump is actually how down on the United States he is. This is so unusual for a presidential candidate. Presidential candidates basically have to say, America is still the greatest country on earth, but we've sort of gone in a bit of a wrong direction, but I will restore it because I'm just a humble servant of this country. Whereas Trump's like, this place has become a disgusting shithole, and only I can make it better. And so it's quite amazing that he, sort of as the nationalist, actually has the free hand to run the country down in the way that he does.
I think it's also important that Roger has mentioned that the United States has lost 2 wars that it started, essentially. Yeah. The Iraq adventure is an unmitigated fiasco by any measure. It's a catastrophe, even if you were one of those people who took the stated aims of the Bush and his cronies seriously. However you define the goal of the Iraq invasion, it failed. It failed in every respect. And so I think in terms of military power and determination to intervene in the world by using that power, it's over, essentially.
Yeah, it failed, and it diverted energy, resources, and attention from a war that was winnable in Afghanistan, that I would argue actually was not started by the United States, but was winnable until the Iraq War began. So it was a double disaster.
I hoped for a happier ending than that, but we'll have to wait till November, maybe. I'm so grateful to the 4 of you for helping us navigate this extremely confusing election, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.